already today the political dysfunction in Nelson Mandela Bay. Within that is the fact that the city appears to be running out of water, and it's running out of water fast. One of the main problems is that there's no proper agreement to allow the city to take more water from the Nooidgedacht water scheme. The National Treasury, in fact, has sent its own expert, Dr Gisela Kaiser, to try and sort out some of the problems. She joins us now. Dr Kaiser, good afternoon to you, and I appreciate the time. Firstly, the dams that supply the city, from what I can see, they're only at around 11%. That's a tiny figure. How scary is it? Is the metro going to run out of water?
Stephen, it is indeed a scary figure. For the entire year, dam levels have been below 20%, and now for the past few months, they've hovered around the 12%, and today they're at 11.6%. So yes, you know, when we were in Cape Town, we panicked when dams they dipped below 20% once. So here, it has been a perpetual problem that dam levels have stayed low, but due to the fact that the drought has been going on for a couple of years, people have just become used to dam levels being low, and occasionally it rains in the bay, and then people hope that dams will fill up, but it hasn't happened so far.
So, I mean, is it just drought? Is it also bad infrastructure? I mean, as usual with these things, it's probably both.
Right, so in the case of Cape Town, we got water only from the Western Cape water supply system, so it was all the local dams. Here, approximately 2/3 of the current supply of water comes from the Gariep dam through the Nooidgedacht scheme. So for the city to be okay with just Nooidgedacht water, it would need to cut its consumption to approximately 2/3. At the moment, our consumption is between 280 and 290 million litres a day, and we need to reduce that to 230. What we want to do is to make the local dams last as long as possible so that our connecting infrastructure reaches a point where we can circulate more of the Nooidgedacht water around the city. But should we continue to draw down our dams at the current level, then dams will run dry, and approximately half the households in the city are likely to be faced with having a water crisis, dry taps, not flushing toilets before Christmas of this year. So it is indeed an urgent situation.
Is there enough water in the Nooidgedacht water scheme, water that comes from the Gariep dam? I mean, is there actually enough water there for Nelson Mandela Bay to use?
Well, in terms of the allocations from the department, we will also be using our local dams. We've got springs in Uitenhage, and a couple of the dams are not at such high risk of running out of water. There are a number of water systems, and it's really the Koge water system and the Krom system that are running extremely low. The largest dams are owned and operated by the National Department, and they have implemented restrictions on those dams to make the dams last for as long as possible. And we are doing our very best to adhere to the restrictions, but what it requires is for individual households in the bay to use less water.
So, I mean, are people obeying that? I mean, people get used to warnings. They start to ignore them after a while. I think Eskom is probably a good example of that. Are you finding the same problem then?
Absolutely. To date, it has been really, really difficult to grab attention. I believe we are making some inroads. There is a deficit of trust in general between households and municipalities, but we're trying to rebuild that by really being honest with our customers out there. So what we've asked is that the area that's currently served by local dams, that everybody in that area reduce their household use immediately by 40%. And that those people who are served currently by Nooidgedacht water reduce their consumption by 20%. And the reason for this is that we want to be honest. We don't want to ask households to save more water than we can currently use around the city. And we are really hoping that we'll be able to rebuild trust and that people will internalize the message, just how dire it would be if they woke up on Christmas morning and the taps don't work and the toilets don't flush, so that we save water now while we still have some water in the dams that we can save, so that we can successfully get through until the 1st of May next year, when we will have more infrastructure in place to circulate water around the metro.
There have been many, many warnings for years that the city, that the metro will run out of water. And I realize your job is to fix it. It's not your job to blame people. I'm the journalist. It's probably my job to blame people. Why did no one act on this before?
Even, I worked at the City of Cape Town for quite a while. It is not easy. If it was easy, people would do it. There are always competing priorities for budgets. Infrastructure, if you look at the roads infrastructure around the country, billions, absolute billions are going to be required to fix that. So there is always another crisis looming. But what we have to do in this crisis is to make it count and to make sure that after the crisis, our infrastructure is in better nick. And we are working hard on that to replace really the aging meters, aging infrastructure, to institute pressure management systems, etc. There's been a long delay in implementing the Nooidgedacht scheme, which means that we've been drawing down the local dams a lot further than we would otherwise have done. But you are completely right. I'm here to try to look for solutions. It is what it is, and I am virtually begging the public to work with us on this, because Nelson Mandela Bay has faced a number of crises over the past 20 years, and it simply cannot afford this one. The implications, if business don't have water, it was bad enough with COVID, but then the whole world shut down. If taps run dry in half the city and business and industry close their doors, the city won't be able to exist any longer.
Is there a structural problem as well? I mean, I don't know how cities work, but I would imagine that if, for example, you pay money for electricity, some of what you pay for electricity goes towards the electricity infrastructure. If you pay money for water, some of it goes to the water infrastructure. Has that been the case in Nelson Mandela Bay? I mean, is there a sort of change that needs to be made in the future?
Stephen, it is certainly part of what the City Support Program is aiming to do. I was fortunate when I was the executive for utility services in Cape Town that it was run like a cost-reflective, ring-fenced unit, which means that all the revenue from selling electricity, water, and sanitation and waste removal services went to the business. So the revenue is spent only on the business. In Mandela Bay, it has not been like that up to date, and we are certainly hoping that after this crisis, we are currently working with the city, the CFO, etc., to try to get a transition system aligned so that at the end of the crisis, it will be able to operate as a business. Because if you don't know what the cost is of a service, it is very difficult to spend the right amount, to price it at the right level, and then to spend the right amount of money to keep it running, fix it, keep it up to date. And my belief is that water is the most basic of human rights. It's the most basic of the service that a municipality needs to provide, and it certainly requires to be prioritized in this way. And as other metros around the country are operated as ring-fenced, cost-reflective units, this city needs to move there as well.
So there's some things that we can control and some things that we can't control here. I mean, we can't control when it's going to rain, and that would probably be the biggest thing. I mean, that would give you a little bit of relief. What can be controlled is the amount of water that people use. You've already made an appeal around that. There's a huge issue there. And then also the Nooidgedacht scheme. There's not actually a lot you can control here. The main thing, as you keep saying, is that people need to use less water. That's really the only way around this.
Absolutely. Our plan is premised on there not being any rainfall. So it is a little bit of a worst case plan, but we also need a specific type of rainfall in the catchments. We need high intensity rainfall events. In the past 2 weeks, it's rained an average of about 30 millimeters at the various dams. But what we need is a high intensity event of about 50 millimeters in one go. And that needs to be followed by more rainfall over a period of a week or so to really make a noteworthy difference in the dams. So as we cannot control that, we are focusing all our efforts on demand and on getting the message out there. And, in Cape Town, we managed to reduce our consumption by 55%. And here, so far, our consumption is hardly reduced at all. So I know from personal experience that it can be done. we need to get everybody on board and work together, and then we can still have a happy Christmas with water coming out of our taps.
Dr. Gisela Kaiser, thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate the time. Expert on water deployed by the National Treasury to Nelson Mandela Bay. Thank you very much indeed.